Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with my smiley co-host Teos Abadia. Hey Teos, good to see you again, sir.
It was great to see you, Shawn. I feel like today we're going to have the best recording with the Roll20 folks. Just a hunch.
I have a feeling it's going to last just the perfect amount of time. We're going to get the perfect amount of information. So as Teos is hinting, we are going to be interviewing uh, some employees of Roll20, specifically Morgan Buck and Andrew Searles. And they are going to tell us about what's happening on Roll20 and ask and answer our questions, including some that you have asked. But before we get to all of that goodness, we are going to give you some news and some opinions. And we are going to start with our listener corner. After our discussion, just the introduction of the 5e we had tons of people commenting at us and discussing with us on our Patreon Discord all sorts of things about the DMG and what should be in it and what shouldn't be in it. And it would be impossible to have that full discussion. But I grabbed one comment from Joey Wright via Twitter to give us something to discuss today. And Joey asked, what do you think about the idea of the DMG and the player's handbook as advanced rules? Isn't the game covered in the free basic rules? I like the DMG, but never worried about it teaching me how to play or to DM. And by the way, love the show. Well, thank you, Joey, for that. And thank you for the question. I want to give Teos the first crack at this if he so chooses. If
Sure.
not, I will definitely jump in.
I always am up to the task. I think, well, there are two answers to this to me. One is a marketing answer, and the other is what do DMs want answer. Marketing wise, it's really dangerous to say, hey, you've got to buy this one thing and then buy these other things, or these other things don't work without the first thing. And that's some of what we were talking about last time when we talked about the idea of the starter set as it dovetails with the DMG and Player's Handbook, right? The intro to the DMG suggests that you've read the starter set. And that's a bit of a problem because now you're saying that all three things must be purchased. And that's not great. And in fact, after recording, I looked at various places on D&D Beyond that either did or did not mention the starter set in relation to the DMG and PHB. So even that story is not consistent, right? And so I think that's where it's really hard to pull it off. If you're really going to say you must buy this starter set before you can move on to the rest, that's hard from a marketing perspective. And then from the perspective of what DMs want, I think that ideally you want to be able to pick up any one of those and have enough to get you started. What do you think, Shawn?
Yeah, isn't the game covered in the free basic rules? Yes, it is. But the free basic rules do not teach you how to be a dungeon master. Could you make those free basic rules coverage of how to be a dungeon master? You could, but then they go from being something that that is intended just to teach the basic rules to something that teaches you how to dungeon master. And those are two separate things. We have to always remember that the game part of this hobby we call Dungeons and Dragons runs off the back of dungeon masters. Without dungeon masters, you can't play the game, or you're going to have a very hard time playing the game. The growth of the game part of the hobby is going to be contingent on getting enough dungeon masters to serve the needs of the players. If you don't continually convince people to DM and then teach those people how to DM, the game will stagnate. So, if the free basic rules are going to be the place to teach DMs, then they're going to need to change. What I want to see is, and what I hear people say is, well, we'll let third-party publishers or creators teach people how to play. We'll let the YouTubers teach you how to DM. We will let other books teach you how to DM. And that's okay. But if you're Wizards of the Coast You do not want third-party people teaching you your DMs how to play. You want to be the one teaching your DMs how to DM. Why? A million reasons. Are there good third-party publishers and content creators who do that? Absolutely. Are they always going to love your game? Are you maybe do something to upset them?
Mhm.
And now the people who are following them for good DMing advice are going to be hearing about other games or hearing about how terrible you are. That's not what you want. So you want
Mhm.
to be teaching the people how to DM as Wizards of the Coast. Let the advanced stuff, let the niche stuff be done by third-party creators,
Yeah.
third-party publishers. Uh, that's the best answer I can give. You
Yeah.
want the Dungeon Master's Guide to do what it says and guide dungeon masters.
Yeah, and I think of from time immemorial, you have all these stories of people who will say, you know, my parents bought me the red box, and I looked at it and I didn't get it, and it sat on my shelf for 3 years. But then a friend of mine, you know, there's so many variations on those kinds of stories that start with essentially, if you recode it and write it in plain English, this product was crappy at telling me what to do, so I almost lost out on the opportunity. Well, there are lots of people who actually did lose out on the opportunity and didn't have that friend come by or the other thing that could have led them down the path to becoming a huge fan. So you need to break away that barrier so that the game is always super easy to run, right? So that any of these products that you pick up tells you exactly what you need to get going. And it's the starter set and it's the player's handbook and it's the DMG and it's the adventures too. That beginning should be really easy to run. So you can just jump right into it because you hear
Yeah.
that a lot too. I picked up Tomb of Annihilation and then I realized, wait, there are a lot of things I got to deal with. I'm in Out of the Abyss and there are all these
Right.
NPCs I'm supposed to expertly role play. I'm way over my head, right? Like chapter one, any adventure
Yeah.
should be easy.
Who is it at game companies that deal the most with on-ramping and making accessible the rules? Um, Sometimes it's the game designers.
Mm.
Sometimes the game designers are fully focused on that. Oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes it might be marketing people. Oftentimes it might be even, other people, the social media people. Everyone has to work together at a game company to
Yeah.
make this game accessible. And sometimes we as designers forget how inaccessible even a relatively simple game might be. As I teach games to college student writers, I think, oh, this game is simple. This game is easy. It's nowhere near as complicated as D&D. And then I try to explain it to them. And I realize I could spend 6 weeks doing this, and I still wouldn't even really scratch the surface of the complexity of this relatively simple game. And we as designers forget that. And we as designers focus too much on people who already know how to play rather than thinking about people who are learning to play
Mm.
or are trying to learn to teach other people how to play.
Yeah.
And we can't make the game simple enough for them. And if we want this game to grow, we need to make this game simple enough for them, or at least some version of this game.
No, that was great. And you know, I heard another comment which was from our friend Andy Demps. I think he made this on our Patreon Discord, where he said that the format of Spelljammer, which will be also used for Planescape, of these three separate books, he said, you know, that's a thing that I would love to see for the DMG, where you'd have these three books and each one would cover different topics, such that some of them might be really for when you're a beginner, but then these other books might be your go-to with tools and things like that. And I thought that was a really fascinating idea. What do you think?
Mm, yeah, that's the kind of outside the box, but inside the box set thinking that we need when we design these games or redesign these games, right?
Yeah.
Because you and I, we've gone through 5+ Dungeon Masters guides, and it's always the same, right? It's always the big, thick book, and it
Mhm.
always has this and it always has that. And just as Andy said, dividing it up into 3 books where this is how you learn to play, this is how you learn to DM, and this is the extra stuff about creating adventures, and you can pull out each book separately. It's a
Yeah.
brilliant idea.
One could be lore, right? There's so many ways you could cut it, and it's a really
Yeah.
neat. I love that concept. Andy needs to get
Mhm.
hired by
Or
Wizards.
at
That's the
least
answer.
think about it that way.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right now.
Yep.
So thank you to Joey Wright for asking us that question. You can always send in your questions through all of the ways that we're going to talk about at the end of the show. But for now, let's get to our news and our commentary. And boy, did we get some stuff this week. We got a new Unearthed Arcana, 50 pages of Unearthed Arcana. So we cannot cover all of that in just one news segment. We will look at some of the important things in future episodes, but for now, we are just going to give some general feedback and some of our summary thoughts on it. Would you like to start with any thoughts, Mr.
Uh,
Abadia?
well, so I did commence down the path of reading it and also just looking at the high level of what's there. I mean, I actually I went to work out on the treadmill and I thought, oh, I will read this on the large iPad screen, but first I'll watch the video. I was done working out and the video wasn't over. That's how long this playtest is. It takes them an hour to tell us what's in it. So
Yeah.
there's a lot there, and I think what they're trying to do is to speak to us a bit more, and they're trying to also give us some exciting reasons why we want this 2024 version. I think that they are doing a lot more hearing of what people are saying and of the cautions that people are kind of pronouncing out there, the worries that they have that they're sharing. So that's my high level take, is that I think that they are trying to do a better job of this release to both make it exciting and speak to the concerns we have. What do you think?
Mhm. I agree. And I there are two Shawns here, right? There's the Shawn who's the player, and the kid who plays D&D, who
Mhm.
really wants to see all of these things and wants to dig in and look at every little change. And then there's the game designer, business person in the game industry who could care less about these changes in the minutia of them,
Mhm.
because I just need to know what the final version is going to look like. We have no guarantee that anything that we see in these play tests will be the final version. I am ready and willing to pick over the gory details when I know that this is what I need to do in order to make compatible content
Mhm.
in the future. Until then, I just want you to do it. You've told me that now this is just going to be a polish of 5e. This is going to be 5e revised, not 6e, maybe not even 5.5, right? This is going to be that. So I have 12 things on my plate right now. Reading a 50-page document to see that you've moved this one at ability from level 11 to level 9 is not my time best spent.
Well, and also, but do you think somewhat that way because it feels to me, I don't know if you share this sense, it feels to me like a lot of this is done. And what I mean by that is D&D Next would give us like a play test, and it would be like, okay, we're all going to play through this experience, right? Because it would be characters, monsters, an adventure, and we'd play through it and we'd give feedback. And the next version would be wildly different or significantly different because they were listening to that feedback and trying things. This doesn't feel to me like they're trying things. This feels to me like they are, not that they won't receive feedback and act on it. I'm not saying that, right? But this is pretty much what
Mhm.
they want to put in the book. And the clock is running out, there's a deadline to reach. So it'll largely be like this. So feedback, it's hard to know how much of it would be listened to. I don't know if that's the way you feel, if that at all contributes to your feeling.
No, I don't think. I think what you said is what I said, just in a different way,
Okay.
because I feel like not only are they done really, and they're just showing us some things, they were done in 2014,
Uh-huh.
and so I I gave them my feedback then,
Uh-huh.
both, as a first line
Yeah.
playtester plus as a, regular old playtester going along. Uh, I've already given them my feedback. I gave them my feedback 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so now I just need to know, are all subclasses going to start at level 3? Yes. Okay,
And you
good.
design accordingly.
I
Yeah, yeah,
need to
for sure.
know, oh, fighters are going to now have this special thing that they can do with their weapons. Okay, I will need to
Mhm.
keep that in mind as I design subclasses.
Right.
The one thing from what I've read so far is I've been worried. What I really am worried about is the power creep,
Hmm.
because as well as I, as an edition goes along, power creep is not just, well, for some people it's a feature, not a bug, because then you get to sell more books to people who
Hmm.
want the stronger stuff.
Mm.
But it makes the game worse. Power creep makes the game worse in the long run. I don't think
Yeah.
anyone would uh, deny that with any seriousness. And so, because we're not getting a new game, because we're just getting a revised version, all we're getting is, if you don't make it more powerful, people aren't going to like it, or a certain segment, but a significant segment of the player base is not going to like it unless there is power creep.
Yeah. And then
So
every
then what you have
every
to do with monsters to make up
Mhm.
for that power creep, you have to make them harder. Then the backwards compatibility question comes into play.
Yeah.
Well, if you make your monsters harder because you made your character options stronger, then what do you do with the stuff that you said it's compatible with?
Yep. Amen. Yeah, I have been very concerned by that. And in theory, every playtest document starts with a little block where we're told, don't worry about power, that'll get sanded down later. But I have worked with Wizards long enough and had enough friends who were staffed there at various different years that a common story is that designer is amazing and also did not get why this thing was powerful because nobody in their home campaign breaks this kind of thing. But in my home campaign, they do. And
Mhm.
this is totally going to break. And the more that you're playing up at the high level of, optimization, if you're providing that, the harder it is to tamp it back down in a reasonable way because you've created those opportunities and you got to think of all the permutations in which that's going to go wild.
Mhm.
And there are a number of things like that where I thought to myself, gee, I bet if we had the old fourth edition forums still up, the official D&D forums, people would be just tossing around ideas already breaking this Unearthed Arcana because it is so much more powerful than before. And if you would all end up at this level, then I really wonder what monsters are going to look like and encounter building rules. And are you going to change
Mhm.
that completely? But you can't change that completely. So yeah, it's a concern I share. Hmm.
Yeah. So what we will talk about more is our second bit of news, which was Jeremy Crawford's talk on the new Unearthed Arcana, including weapon mastery and class design. So on the 25th, Jeremy reviewed weapon mastery. He also had some comments on the core of the new class design. And let me say this: Jeremy is a great presenter.
Mm.
He's smart. He's insightful as a game designer. He's great as a presenter. He could tell me that they're going to rip my appendix out, and the way he says it, I would be like, "Oh yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah. I think
yeah,
that's a good idea."
yep.
Just the way he presents it,
Hmm.
it
Puts a
makes it
smile
hard
on
for
your
me
face.
to
Yeah,
like
yeah.
get to the words. He's like, "Yeah, that makes perfect sense that my appendix should be ripped out." Uh, so I just love listening. His voice is very soothing, and
Hmm.
his presentation is immaculate, and I love it. Uh, and then I listen to the words behind that great presentation, and I'm like, okay, deep breaths. I have written in the show notes deep cleansing breaths in at least two places. I will let you guess where those are going to be. So, some of the things that Jeremy said. People might be wondering, how can you change a class dramatically and still work with the books that are already in print?
Good
And he
question.
said, we have designed all of the adventures for fifth edition so that the adventures are not aware of how a class functions on the inside. And as if you separate that quote from, I don't want to say reality because that sounds dismissive, but if you separate that quote from a detailed look at it, it makes perfect sense. Classes are classes, adventures are adventures, And it doesn't matter what goes on within the class because there's an output that then interacts with the adventure.
Mm-hmm.
However, I say that quote is demonstrably false because both you and I have designed 5th edition adventures
Mm-hmm.
and published by Wizards of the Coast. And I did so. I designed those adventures fully aware, painfully aware of how a class functions because I knew what certain classes not only could do, but will do over and over again. And I designed the encounters within that adventure to take that into account, to draw the best story and to draw the best game
Mm-hmm.
out of those class features. So I want to push back against that statement.
Well, and then I love the next. So I fully agree. And then I love the next quote, which is it's hard for me to say these words. Class in 5th edition is a piece of content. It's not a piece of the system. And so long as we have maintained the system and may continue to maintain it in the 2024 rulebooks, you will be able to use the new content options with the books you already have.
Pregnant pause.
Class in 5th edition is a piece of content. It hurts my soul a bit. And that it's not a piece of the system.
I saw that quote out of context right before I went to my class. So I went to my class and I just wrote that small, class is not system, class is content on the board. And there are some people in my class who aren't familiar with D&D very much, and there are some who are like way into D&D, designing their own stuff. And I said, this is something that just came from Jeremy Crawford. I don't have the context for it, but what do you think? True or false? And I had people arguing both sides about it was or it wasn't. And we had an actually very good discussion on that. But what we came out with pretty much as an agreement was that, yes, there is a system of D&D that operates outside of class, but class needs to integrate very closely with that system, so closely that it is practically impossible to separate the class structure from the system.
That's great. I can't say it better than that. That's
Yeah.
Except that I'd like
It's
to take your
like
class.
saying that a CD, right, is not the same thing as a CD player. Yes. But without both of them working together, you're not going to get any music out of that. And for our younger listeners, CDs are these little round discs that you could put into a music player and get sound out of.
They'll be all the rage in about 20 years.
Exactly.
It's I mean, it's really fascinating. And, anybody can be quoted in a certain way, and we may not love the quote. But, what is behind it in both of these statements is what I struggle with, right? It's not just even the exact words or whatever, but it's that concept that your class is not being designed in an integral way with all of the rest of the system, or that you can interchange it in a way without it having this relationship. And I don't see that that's true in this edition at all. If any edition it's been true, I don't know. But
right.
Yeah.
If you could play D&D without choosing a class, I would say that's absolutely true.
Right. Or if
but the play experience is so different.
It is. It's a super different experience based on what classes you have at the table and how. And it's not that the game will break if you say don't have a cleric, but it's a different experience, right? And we design differently based on it. We design adventures differently, and we take into account all kinds of considerations when we're building things for it. Yeah, it was a really very interesting statement.
And the last thing I wanted to say was, as a third party publisher, if you went to Wizards of the Coast and said, I would like you to publish this thing that my company or that I created, and they would say, yes, we can publish this and this and this, but we're not going to publish your subclasses because subclasses are too, I would say, too tied to the system. They are too important to the game to just publish without a proper amount of design, development, and play testing. So we'll publish your backgrounds, we'll publish even feats or your adventures or your monsters, even, but we're not going to, not classes, definitely not, but not even subclasses. That tells me that they are more integral to the system than not.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Okay, that's the part where I need to deep
Yeah,
cleansing breaths.
yeah, deep cleansing breaths. Well,
The
I've got something
last
that
quote
cleanses.
from
Oh, you
that.
got another? Yeah, you want
Oh,
to talk about the
go
last
ahead.
quote? No, no. I was going to move on, but we can.
The last quote. We will delve. Let's real quick. We will delve more into that. We will delve more into that the closer we get to the release of those books. And he says, and that once they know what a class will look like based on playtesting and final design, they will look at how it compares to the 2014 version and address that. And
Yeah,
that seemed like it was something important, but I'm still trying to parse what exactly that means.
I mean, it says to
He said at
me
one point,
that you're kind
you
of
go.
like you're gonna design what you think it should be, and later you're gonna compare and say how far did we get away from where we were, and what do we need to do about that. And that's sort of okay, but I feel like that's something you do at an earlier phase when you're sort of just dreaming about what you want something to be, but that we'd already be at the process where you would be equating this. And so if you're going to leave it to the end, well, how far down the line are you waiting before you get to that step? Just seemed to me interesting from a design
Mhm.
perspective. It feels later in the process than what I would
Yeah,
expect one would want to use, but it's not my area of
yeah.
expertise. So.
Yep, we will have a lot more to say about this in future shows as we go through the UA bit by bit. But you were talking about cleansing, Teos. You were talking about
Yes,
cleansing.
there was
What's the
news.
cleansing?
News that cleansed me greatly was it was National Library Week, and the Washington Secretary of State celebrated this by showing off the Acquisitions Incorporated hardback book that we worked on with Penny Arcade and for Wizards of the Coast. I mean, that's amazing.
All I
And
can say at this point,
mhm.
all I can say is Steve Hobbs, not for governor of Washington, not for president of the United States, Steve Hobbs for Galactic Overlord.
Galactic Overlord.
He's got my vote.
That is
Mhm,
appropriate and very Acquisitions Incorporated. The beautiful thing of this picture of
mhm.
Secretary of State Washington, Secretary of Washington, Steve Hobbs holding the Ack Inc. book in a library setting is it's available as a poster. So if you follow the link we have,
Mhm,
or if you look it up on Twitter, you can print out this poster to truly enjoy National Library Week as it was meant to be enjoyed.
mhm. Absolutely. And now to some just small news about, the business of D&D. Hasbro is reporting that D&D in the first quarter of 2023 has grown, and not just by a bit. It's grown quite significantly. While at the same time, sales for all of Hasbro have declined 14% on a year-to-year comparison. So they made $1 billion in quarter one, which was down 14%, but it did beat the consensus of only 878.4 million that Wall Street put on them. And
But
of
hey,
course, then shares went up because even though you declined, you didn't decline as much as we thought you would. So have money.
mm, stock market is
Yeah.
amazing.
What
Really is.
else did we learn, Teos?
Well, yeah, consumer products fell 23%. So we've been seeing that. The traditional side of Hasbro is struggling greatly. Um, I mean, and I say that with a little bit of caution because there's a lot of non traditional stuff that's failing too. But overall, the whole of Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming increased 12%, and the entertainment segment revenues declined 19%. Magic the Gathering increased 16%. So as usual, it's hard to say exactly how much did D&D grow, but it was said to have grown. The toy market is diving, and so what does that mean? It may mean that there is still continued emphasis on D&D and what it's going to do, and it probably underscores the importance of the virtual tabletop endeavors they're doing. It underscores the importance of the 2024 release, because this is all seen as part of that growth that must be fueled into continuing, right?
And that is our news. Now we will get to our interview with Andrew and Morgan of Roll20.